Hello, everyone. And as promised, I am back here with Albiona. Welcome, Albiona, to the Reflective Parenting Podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, Cindy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, since we talked, I had a change in the name of the podcast. It used to be Curious Neuron, but we realized that the work that we were doing here at Curious Neuron really focused on helping parents learn how to reflect on many things. And today we're going to be reflecting with you on tantrums. And that's something that I haven't touched in a really long time. But I know that many parents struggle still with tantrums. And it's always something, it's a work in progress, right? For us to understand them, which is part of the work that you do as well. Before we get into that, I'd love to know a little bit more about you. What led you in your life to the journey and to the place that you are today in supporting parents, especially with these big emotions that they have with their children?
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to share. So, I have worked with children and families in some capacity to probably my 23rd year, I would say. My background is in early childhood development. I went on to teach, and then I became the director of a preschool and loved it, really loved teaching. I've really been one of those people who's had a lot of career pivots, but never from a place of like, I can't do this anymore. I just need to get out of here, but more of like, this felt so fulfilling. Where can I go next? Like, where can I take this and do something different with it? Can I go deeper with this work? So I taught for 12 years, and at that point went back to graduate school and got my master's in speech and language pathology. Continued to work with kids, though I really loved working with adults as well, but switched gears from the schools and went into the medical side of the degree and worked in an outpatient center here right outside of Detroit, and then went on to become the director or the assistant director of, it's called the Kaufman Children's Center. It was really such an incredible place to work and to get to know the kids and families, and the beauty in kind of having that sort of experience of first just teaching, not just teaching, but having the experience of really working with, more often than not, it was neurotypical children, and then switching gears. And as a speech and language pathologist, especially on the medical side of things, I tended to work with more complex cases and children who had multiple diagnoses. And, there was a lot to sort of unpack and figure out. And I really loved it. I really loved connecting with these kids and connecting with their families. And so what started to happen was I just wanted to write on the topic of not just parenting, but also kids. And I was a parent myself going through all of this and going through graduate school with two young children and all the things that come with that. So I sort of started to realize that it would be fun to have this outlet. This was, even before COVID. So I started to write, and then local publications started to reach out and say, can we publish this? Will you write something about this? And from there, people started to reach out and say, do you ever do consults? Would you ever come to our home? Would you ever? And at first I said no, because there was such a reluctance to, at least from my point of view, parenting is such a personal experience and it's such a personal journey, and we all are sort of here to take from it what we need to. And I think it's a really sort of divine and intentional relationship with our kids, right? They really come to us for very good reason, and us to them. And so at first I said no, because I said, I don't want to really tell people how to do it. There are enough people out there telling you how to do it and what to do. And I didn't really want to take up space in that way. I just wanted to be, as your podcast indicates, just more reflective about it. My kids were starting to get older, and I could sort of see things through that rearview mirror lens. And I was hands-on working with kids simultaneously, and also understanding the struggles that a lot of parents were finding themselves in, particularly through COVID and even post-COVID. So I started to then slowly but surely start to say yes to people, and okay, like, I will help you. Let's meet for an hour. And from there it just really, really grew. I had never had social media until I was, I want to say 38, and I'm now 45. And so then I thought, well, if I want to write and if I want to share these things, then I probably should get on social media and have an understanding of how that works. And so from there things really grew, and I started to find that what parents were really needing and wanting was somebody to sort of cut through the noise and just simplify the process, and to just remind us that we really all have it within us to solve whatever challenge is in front of us. I don't ever think I'm taking a parent from, I'm not giving them really anything that feels earth shattering. I think what I'm really doing is quieting the noise for them to really understand, like, oh, that's exactly what they need. And yes, it might be hard. And yes, my child might struggle a little, but it's also on me to really hold that space for them and walk them through it, rather than getting activated and escalated with them.
Mm.
So that's what resulted. And now I have the Parenting Reframe. I also host my own podcast and I coach families for 12 weeks at a time. And it's been such a wonderful process and journey. I really love getting to know these families and being there to guide them through some of the ups and downs of what it is to parent.
I absolutely love the work that you do. And, we connected a little while ago now, and just the fact that you said you try to simplify and quiet the noise. From what I've read and learned about you now, I see that very well and very clearly, through just the acronym that we're going to walk through after. It just helps us like come to simplify that moment that feels very chaotic, right? As a parent, and it just feels like there's distractions and noise coming from everywhere, including inside our minds. So I think it's important for us to see it that way in terms of a simplistic way. So we're going to be talking about tantrums today specifically again. And I think that the best place to start with this conversation is to talk about a reel that you posted that went viral, and it for all of the best reasons, because it was such a good topic. It's not just about a tantrum, but I wrote it down so I don't forget. But should I hug my child or ignore them during a tantrum? And I think that question, it really marked me because I've heard it, asked in different ways, but it comes down to really not even knowing what to do in that moment and really struggling with, making the decision. And I think that's where we get stuck as parents, right? It's like, what do I do? Like, what can I do in this moment? Part of us just wants to end it and stop it, but
Yeah.
then we know we're supposed to support them. So how about we start with that reel? What was the point that you were trying to get across? You mentioned the outcomes, and I think that will be a good place for us to continue the conversation, but just to help us get a better idea of what the reel was about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, so it's interesting. You never know, sort of, I'm sure you know on social media too. We never know what resonates. Like I always post so much and sometimes I'm like, "Oh, I think this is really important," and it like falls on no one cares. And then sometimes you post this, what feels like the simplest question, and suddenly that's the thing that really resonates. And so the question really came as a result of the amount of people who have asked me that in coaching or in group work or in courses that I do. And they would always say, "But can you hug your kid when they're having a tantrum? Like, doesn't that reinforce the tantrum?" So essentially, the follow up to that question is the assumption by the parent is that if I hug them or comfort them, then what I'm actually doing is reinforcing the tantrum, which then means I will continue to deal with tantrums. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just do a quick video on this because it's actually quite simple if we break down what actually perpetuates tantrums, what kids actually need during a tantrum, and what our role is as a parent in terms of like how do we comfort our kids, or do we? And so I backed that up in the reel and I kind of said, okay, let's back up a little bit and first understand what is a tantrum. So a tantrum really is an emotional response to an outcome that your child doesn't want, usually because you either set a boundary or it's a circumstance that can't be helped, right? Like I want to go outside, well, it's thunderstorming, right? So there are sometimes circumstances that prevent us from getting what we want. And so your child now has to deal with an outcome they don't like. This usually elicits an emotional response because they're still learning how to develop the skill to manage that emotion. What we see then is a tantrum. It's sort of the expression of that frustration as they learn to manage. And so yes, the answer to the question in short is you can comfort them. What you want to be careful about, which is I think where most parents struggle, is that we don't want the tantrum itself to change the outcome. And if we
Right.
can parse those
Mm.
two things out, then the emotion is the emotion. And we can certainly comfort and be there to help validate the emotion, to see them in their emotion, to help them work through that emotion. But it's when that emotional response actually changes the outcome that at that point, then we have a tantrum that gets reinforced, and then it can become a learned behavior. It's not to say that the tantrum doesn't start for good reason, but if there is a benefit to it, meaning if every time the outcome changes, like let's say, I was using this example earlier with a family. A little boy always asks his mom for a snack before dinner, and he's sort of struggling to wait. And that's a skill in and of itself, right? Like the skill of waiting. And so she'll say to him, "No, you can't." And this argument starts, and then he really starts to have moments of emotion dysregulation. He's whining, he starts to cry, the tantrum's getting worse. So instead of just recognizing he's in a tantrum and just saying, "I know it's really hard to not get the thing that we want. I understand that. But after dinner, you'll be able to have them," and just restating that boundary, she'll go into, "Okay, you can have 3 of the fruit snacks now, and then you can have the rest later," which to some extent, to some parents might be like, that's kind of fair. Like you're meeting them in the middle, you're helping them out. And I get that, right? I understand that rationale. But at the end of the day, that's something where the outcome now has changed. Had you just let them experience the emotion and then certainly hug them if they needed the hug, you would be okay. It would be okay. I actually think you'll move through the tantrum phase much faster if you understand that it's really the outcome that we're looking at, and how do we actually validate and comfort them during those moments of dysregulation while staying calm ourselves, which I realize is a tall order. you know, you know.
I know. I know, but I think it's so important to hear for parents to hear this because again, it could become so uncomfortable. And like you said, it's usually coupled with something that we're doing, right? Like we're getting dinner ready, we're getting ready to go out, we're at the store, we're with family, and you're like, I just need to end this. And so part of it is how do I stop it fast? And so changing the outcome is a way for us to stop it very quickly versus thinking about the long-term impact of that and that the child now realizes what can change, right? And so it's just so important for us to think about that. What would you give it as advice to somebody who also feels like they maybe ignoring it will make it stop sooner if the outcome doesn't change, but I ignore it and so they cry for 40 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that also still valid, if you're not changing the outcome?
Yeah, it's always the follow-up question. Like, so are we ignoring them? Like, what are we
Yeah.
doing? Everyone wants like the roadmap to it. And it's such a fair question. So I think there's a couple of ways that people understand or interpret ignoring. So for example, I think if you are upset and I'm sitting with you and I validated your emotions and I'm holding space and I'm not leaving you and I'm there with you, but I'm not necessarily making conversation and talking, because it's really not the best time to be engaging in conversation with our kids or peppering them with explanations as to why we had to set that boundary and justifying the rationale behind the boundary we're setting. But it just to really be calm and steady and to be there with them. That's not really ignoring, but it's also a little bit where you're not constantly engaging with them either. Now, some people see ignoring and they define it this way when I work with them. They'll turn to their child and say, okay, until you're done crying, I'm not talking to you. When you're done crying, then I will talk to you again. Now, do you see the vast difference between those two ways that we might approach ignoring? So in the first one, we're still recognizing the child's emotions. We're still there with them. We're keeping them safe. We're offering comfort if they need it.
Mm.
And then in the second one, there's still some degree of shaming or making the child feel bad for their emotions. And the hope is that, to your point, maybe the outcome will change faster if I just change route. If I just say, like,
Right.
okay, you know what? If you don't stop it right now, you're not getting this tomorrow. So we can tend to punish the tantrum sometimes in an effort to get it to stop, which is really our own struggle to regulate our own discomfort that arises when our kids are in their own sort of struggle or peril around something. So
Mm.
what do we do, right? Because sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, this is lasting forever. So usually with younger children, I think it's really important that you can start to at some point, redirect, but also it's kind of more along the lines of co-regulation. Like, what if you just sort of directed your attention towards something else? And, I used to do this a lot as a therapist, but when I would have a child who was really struggling and didn't want to be in therapy, and maybe it was their first one or two sessions and they were just getting to know me, and, they were unsure of the environment. Maybe they thought I was a doctor. Like, kids have a lot of different sort of preconceived ideas before they enter a space. And so I would just start to play with toys, but I never directly looked at the child. Because even eye contact, specifically if we're thinking of children who might be speech delayed, or if there is any kind of neurodivergence, a lot of times even eye contact to some kids implies you're going to ask me something, you're going to put a demand on me, you're going to give me a direction, I already know where this is going. So I wouldn't really even look at them, and it could have appeared as ignoring, but what I was actually doing was just trying to create a calm space where enjoyable things were happening. And then I would hear the crying start to slow down, and then a giggle when they'd watch me do something. And then maybe I would take a car from the ramp that I was playing with and I would just roll it in their direction. But I still didn't look at them. I still didn't say a word. And
Mm.
then lo and behold, after 2 minutes, they would scoop that car up. They would come sit right next to me. Like, at that point, it was like they decided this is fair. This is good. I like it. And then they put the car on the ramp, and I still don't really talk to them. I'll just play right
Mm.
along with them. Like, oh, your car went so fast that time. That was amazing.
Mm.
And I'm just slowly letting myself kind of enter their world, but sort of at their
Mm.
pace too. So
Mm.
in that instance, I'm allowing them to feel sad. I'm not insisting they stop. I'm not telling them, your mom's coming back, you don't need to cry. Like, I'm not not trying to convince them otherwise, but I am just trying to show them there are other things we can look at and do and play, and we can have fun, and we can be engaging in all these other ways. So I think, again, to your point, you don't necessarily have to sit and write it out for 45 minutes.
Mhm.
There are other ways around it. Now, I also do like Joe Newman's work. He's the author of a book called Raising Lions, and he is especially just has a real sort of talent when it comes to children who are a little older, and he describes them as lions, and where in some cases they might have a diagnosis of something, maybe not, but he says there really is an art to how we want, like a tantrum in a 7 or 8 year old is very different than when we're talking about a 2 year old, a 2.5 year old, a 3 year old. And so kind of understanding the nuance between those two things, I think, can be important. In which instance, if the child's a little bit older, I would maybe just stay the course and recognize like they don't need to be redirected because they actually have it, the skill within. We just really have to be patient and give them that space, keep them safe, and understand that they will be okay and they will learn to self-regulate.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. As I was kind of listening to this description that you gave in terms of how you would co-regulate with the child, first it made me think of my children's pediatrician. He did the same thing when he would walk into the office. At first I had never seen that before. Their previous doctor never did that, but he would just come in and get things done. Versus Dr. D would come in and say he'd wash his hands, and then he'd look at the wall. There were stickers on the wall. He'd say, "Oh, look at that lion," and then he'd turn around and say, "Oh, hi, Cindy. How are you?" And then
Mm-hmm.
we'd start chatting, and I had a baby on my lap and two toddlers sitting beside me, and he would ignore them. He wouldn't, in not in a mean way, but in a way of
Yes.
like, I'm talking to Cindy right now. And so he would keep talking to me, and then he'd say like, "Can I see your ears?" And then he'd look inside my ear with the instrument and so on. And then my kids would like get curious, and that's when he would notice, he'd pick up on them and say like, "Oh, can I look in your ear?" And it would always work, always. Even my baby on my lap, like he wouldn't he you would see at the beginning he'd be uncomfortable, but then he'd settle in. And it's such a beautiful thing to see that and to hear that you were doing that as well, because the word that comes to mind is unrealistic expectations, or the
Mm-hmm.
words that come to mind. I think that sometimes this is what I talk about to parents also inside the Reflective Parent Club. We have these expectations for ourselves, for our partners, for our kids, thinking that like by the time they're 3 or 4, they're over the tantrums. Or if we've talked about emotions and they know how to label emotions, that they should be good, everything's fine, right? Like they know
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I get emails like this where it's like, well, I've taught my child how to recognize being sad or mad and happy. Why are they still having tantrums? But there's so much more to it, especially when it comes around emotion regulation skills. As an adult, if we never practice this, it's going to take us months.
Yes.
Right? And so we can't really expect our child to kind of get out of this phase very quickly. They're going to need us to co-regulate first and be regulated around them, so that they can see what it looks like and feel safe in that environment. So I'm just so happy that you described that. I just wanted to bring up this idea of also of these unrealistic expectations that we might have, because again, we don't just place them on our kids, we place them on ourselves. We expect everything to be perfect. We're supposed to have a balance of whatever that's supposed to be. Life work balance, it's non-existent.
Yeah.
Right? On our partners too, sometimes we expect certain things, and then that causes dysregulation, or that when we don't meet that expectation, we feel so disappointed, and then it causes us to become dysregulated and upset about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think, and you've probably heard this question several times too, but I'll work with the family and let's say the child's a little bit older, like 6 or 7, and they'll say, but they really should not
Hmm.
be doing this anymore, right? Like they desperately want me to say yes. And I'll say to them, I'm happy to answer that question. But what I'm trying to get you to see is you just have to meet your child where they are. When we get really stuck in the like that they should or they shouldn't be able to do this, I think what we're trying to desperately say is like there is a reason beyond my parenting, beyond my child, that's really causing this thing to happen. And that's not to say that there aren't real things out there that we need to dig deeper on, and maybe an evaluation process would happen, and certain paths would be taken. But nonetheless, regardless of all of that, I think it's so important that we don't get completely stuck in that mindset of like they should have been able to do this by now and now they can't. And so this is really frustrating, and you
Exactly.
know what ends up, right, it's just a defeated kind of feeling. Instead, you can just say like my child struggles with, like just name it, and I'm going to meet their emotional and developmental needs exactly where they're at, and don't get really caught up in the sort of shoulds and supposed tos and the check marks that we want to desperately check off that list, and just really show up for them in the way that they need. And that can be hard sometimes, but I think if we can reframe that, it helps us sort of release some of those expectations that are really causing us more mental anguish, because every time we then see our child engage in that behavior, we're reminded that maybe something's not right. Our child's
Yeah.
not following what the trajectory of what they're supposed to be doing. Clearly, I
We
maybe I
failed.
did something. Yep,
Yeah.
I failed them in some way. I didn't show
Mm,
up in the way they needed. Now think of the, I
mm,
not to get too woo woo, but think of the energetic state you're in as the
sure.
parent
I
when
get that.
all of that is running through your mind. Your
Mm,
child feels that, right? They sense
mhm,
that. They sense the tenseness in your body
mm,
when they do something that you feel like they shouldn't do. So just being
mm.
aware of that, I think sometimes can really help a family like really calm into sort of what they need to do next rather than get stuck in there.
Yeah. S the word escalating the situation comes to mind when you say that, because I don't think that we realize sometimes when we're in it. I often catch my partner, my husband, when he's escalating a situation, and he catches me when I'm escalating a situation. And it's hard to hear from an outsider, but it helps to say, like, just take a breath, like
Yes.
to the adult, take a
Hmm.
breath, because we snap at them. And then always have this visualization of like things getting worse and worse. And then the moment we step back and say, okay, whew, let's take a breath.
Hmm.
Let's pause for a second. I'm sorry, I overreacted. Let's start again, right? Even with an adult, this helps.
So helpful.
The outcome aspect of what you spoke about with tantrums, I think about parents that I've spoken with that really struggle with setting boundaries, or no, holding boundaries.
Hmm.
We've set them, we set the boundaries, children know about them, but in the moment when the emotions get out of control, when we're tired, we're stressed, we're exhausted, we're overwhelmed by everything that's happening, it might not be the first tantrum of the day, and we just I always tell parents to picture this sort of battery, right? And many interactions will either add energy to our battery or decrease it. We could have a spat or an argument with a parent or an in-law, or a big day at work and we had a really stressful day. It's draining, and social interactions are draining for some of us. So dinner time comes and we have nothing left to give, and so the boundaries are looser. What do you say to a parent that says, I was raised on really strict boundaries and I'm trying to do my best, but I really have trouble. I give in because in the end it stops it. And like you said, sometimes it's not really the end of the world. You're like, okay, one more cookie. What's the big deal?
Hmm.
But I already said no, and they started screaming and crying. And now I'm like, okay, just take it. Let's let's move
Yeah.
forward with our evening. So what would you kind of offer a parent as support for that around boundaries?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you emphasize that it's actually holding the boundary that's the hardest part. It's not the
Hmm.
setting. And
Mm.
I just went through this with a parent, and I we can talk about this a little bit, but I teach a 4-step process called PAR to parents to help them shift from reactive to being more responsive in the moment.
Hmm.
And it stands for pause, acknowledge, respond, reflect. So on a call with the client, and she was talking about her 2 kids, and she said, I'm really calm. Like I have no problem with that. I'm really calm. And I was like, that's wonderful. Like sometimes that's half the battle, right? Just getting our own bodies
Of
to sort of
course.
stay regulated.
Mm.
So as we continued talking, and she started to express some of the challenges, and they were a lot of what you're describing, that she'd set a boundary and the kids would not usually listen, and then there was a back and forth, and then there would be some argument, and then an emotional fallout, and then there was some resolution to it. And what I realized was that she actually, it wasn't that she was calm, which in all fairness, she was staying calm, but it was that she was really avoidant. So what would happen is she would set the boundary, they would push back. She could see they were about to become dysregulated or a tantrum would ensue. So she would adjust the boundary and she would modify it in some way so it felt at least more amenable to them, or at least they could manage that a little bit better. And then as a result, yes, she stayed calm, but in part it's because she never went into the storm, right? Like that's the hardest part, is when they're really dysregulated. Then can you really, really manage that and stay calm? And then the reflective part of that PAR process, when I work with parents on this, when I sat with her and I said, most of the time when I talk to parents and they struggle to set and follow through on boundaries with their kids, it almost always is the case that the same is true in your personal life, right? Like it's almost always goes hand in hand. And she said, absolutely, I struggle with the same thing. And so as we did a lot of kind of work around it, what she started to realize is that the story she tells herself is that she's not safe in conflict. So whether it's her kids becoming dysregulated, or the thought of her kids becoming dysregulated, or her partner or a sibling, when she goes to set a boundary, if she believes it will cause distress, she backs away, right? She doesn't go there. It's too difficult for her. And so we worked on this and we got better and better at being able to learn. So one, I would say, is look at like what's the struggle for you when you really walk through the entirety of what it is to set the boundary, hold the boundary, and whatever that outcome is. So is it that your child's going to cry for a very long time and that becomes too much for you? Is it that you feel overwhelmed by the number of tantrums you have to deal with in a day? Like, is it that you need more support from your partner and you're feeling like you're in it alone? I know a lot of times when I work with couples, and I'm sure you see this, there's conflicting views on how to address the emotions. So then there's, sort of the conflict inside of like, well, if I comfort them right now, my partner is going to say I'm being soft. And then if
Yeah.
they come in too harsh, I'm going to need to protect. And so
Mm,
there are so many variables that are adding to
mm,
the distress in that situation. So I always say, like, the first thing that's really good to do is to just take stock of the situation before you are even doing anything different. Like, just take stock of your, what I call patterning. Like, what are you doing in that moment? What is that response pattern? What are you thinking about internally as this is happening? What gets you to the point where you then decide I have to change the boundary because this is like, I can't take it anymore. And then, to sort of give another option, if you're in a position where like, I've worked with families where they're maybe going through divorce, or there's just hard things going on in their lives. They're moving from state to state and they're just, routines are completely upended and things are very different. Now, if you're having one of those days, then before it even gets to the place of setting a boundary, struggling to hold the boundary, and then trying to follow through and then not following through and then giving in, you almost want to give yourself permission on those days to break the rules. Like, and what that means is, so if that, back to my parent who was like back and forth about the fruit snacks before dinner, I said to that parent, if you're really having one of those days and you need to get dinner done because you have to get to soccer practice and work was a lot and there's so much on your mind and you just need those 20 minutes to cook in peace, you can say, guess what? Today is a surprise day. You get to go backwards today and we're going to actually have fruit snacks before dinner. And we make it like it was our decision. Like, we're the ones who dictated that event. It's not something that happens frequently. So now it becomes this fun, cool thing. Today only, guys, backwards day. We're having our fruit snacks before dinner. Here you go. Everybody go play, and then just kind of know that you're eliminating that whole process of the back and forth because you know that you will likely not be able to hold that boundary anyways. So you may as well be the one to dictate the series of events rather than
yeah.
fight and then end up going back on what you said anyways, which just usually results in reinforcement of refusal, protest, whatever it is that resulted in the change of the boundary. So again, you don't want to do that all the time, but I always say, think of like the 80-20 rule in parenting. We can never do it 100% perfect every single day. There are always times where we might have to go, okay, you guys, like, I need everybody to be on their A game today because we're hosting this holiday and and I promise I will do this for you guys if we get through it. Like, we all have those moments. So to just
Of
pretend like
course.
we don't isn't fair either. So I think showing parents, like, giving them permission to balance those things out. So if like 80% of the time you're consistent holding those boundaries and you're having those couple of days where you just know it's like you just don't have any gas left in the tank, then you just be the one to decide what happens and make it a fun thing and just move on.
It's such good advice. It reminds me of when my kids were small and like the age, like when they were all 4 and under, and it's hard to keep them at the table. And we have family dinners and we wanted them to stay there. And there were days where my baby just had like a really bad night. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this day anymore. And so we'd have picnic days. I would
Aw.
put the
Mm-hmm.
blanket on the floor in the living room. And so we have a picnic in the house. And they stayed on the blanket. They thought it was the most exciting thing. And honestly, those are some of my favorite memories because it's just like, I had seen it, I think, on Busy Toddler when my kids were small, but like a popsicle in the bathtub. When I had a small baby, he was my third. I didn't know how to entertain two young kids. And so we had to be very creative. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden saying, like, you know what, let's have a bath. It's 2 p.m. Who cares? We're going in the bath. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
have a popsicle. And my kids were just so excited. Those moments when you let yourself go, it just feels so good.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love that. It makes complete sense. It comes back to the idea what you're talking about in terms of regulating ourselves or thinking about our needs first. This is what I'm hearing from what you're saying, right? And and
Yeah.
and and just always kind of being attuned with where am I right now? What capacity do I have? And not expecting perfection when it comes to emotions. It'll never happen.
Mm-hmm.
We're all human. It's just, there are days when we have the ability to co-regulate and to just regulate ourselves in a way that we can support our kids and our family. But there are days when we're not. We're a mess, and allowing that to happen rather than getting stuck in this cycle of guilt, right? Of like, why can't I? why did I yell today? I shouldn't have done that. Not realizing you haven't yelled in 2 weeks and that's okay. It's fine. Right. Like that kind of capacity, I think. What would you say to a parent who hasn't realized yet? And I think this happens a lot with new parents that are kind of inching their way towards the toddler years, where there's the I have this picture of everything will be perfect. I will be there emotionally for my child. And then the first two, three tantrums happen and you're tired. You might have a baby at that point, who knows, whatever it is. But just realizing, like, I can't do this. Oh my gosh, this is worse than what I thought. And not realizing the importance of your own needs. And what would you say to a parent who hasn't realized that yet?
Yeah, I would say first check in with yourself, right? Like
Always.
it's
Yeah.
okay that it
Mm,
feels hard. It is hard, right? Like we can
mm,
all, people like you and me and that have been in this field and who have worked with children for a very long time can tell you there are multiple moments that are not easy, right? And so one, just recognize like, oh, this is really difficult. I am trying to manage a newborn. My 2-year old is on their fourth tantrum of the day. I can't just let them cry like this. The baby's trying to sleep. I mean, there are always these other kind of variables at play and life is happening. So, one, first and foremost, I would say just check in with yourself and see what you need and what you can manage that day, right? Like, what is it that you can do? And then, how much of it can we preventatively work on, right? So, for some kids, specifically if we're looking at those younger toddler years, they're really impacted by things like diet and sleep and their
mhm,
routines and structure and things like that. So, maybe we're not going to care about every little behavior and things like that, but maybe we're going to make sure we really stick to those meal times because we know that those
mm,
meal times allow for that. We don't see the dips in the blood sugar levels. And now we have a child that's in a fairly, good disposition and in a good mood. And then we're going to make sure they're going down for their naps. And maybe we just prioritize that in the beginning. And we don't
mm.
adhere to the idea of like a perfectly behaved child. Maybe we show
Right.
ourselves a little bit of grace. Maybe they might
Mm.
toss a toy and you might kind of go like, I'm gonna pretend I didn't see that right now because I'm nursing the baby and I can't, like there are
Yeah.
moments where you are going to just have to do that. And so again, like the 80-20 rule is going to be a really
Mhm,
applicable one here to think about depending on the situation you are in life. And then also, let's say that's not the case and you're just overwhelmed by the tantrum and the bigness of it, right? And especially when we go from that phase of, where they're dependent on you and there's more
mhm,
interdependence and they need you to meet all of their needs, and then they start to realize they're independent from you and they're looking for autonomy and agency, and they scream words like no because those words are so powerful for a child, and they invoke change and they can see things in their environment change when they say it. Really kind of think the way they think. They're not doing it because they're trying to be quote unquote bad. They're really
mm,
exploring and understanding this newfound phase that they're in and trying to understand, who am I relative to you? How much power do I have in this situation
mm,
versus you? How far can I go? Where do you meet me halfway? Like that's all happening. So recognizing also that we grew up at a time where we were not taught how to regulate our emotions. We were usually reprimanded or punished or there's a lot of different ways that our parents responded to that, and they meant well. I mean, it wasn't, meant to be hurtful in any way, but we certainly know differently now. And so understanding that as a parent, you're doing something brand new in that moment, when during a tantrum, instead of yelling at your child, you're going to go, I know it's really hard. It's so hard when we have to put our toys away. I get that, but come on over. Let's see who can put away. Can you find all the cars before I find all the stuffed animals? Can you,
mm,
and then we allow that creativity piece to come in. We allow that flexibility to come in. We're a little more playful. We're less rigid and uptight because now we're like, oh, they're crying again. And now we're tense in our shoulders and in our body and we're desperately wanting it to stop. Instead, we just flow with it and are like, yeah, that's
mm.
part of being two. They're going to get really frustrated when the wind blows a certain way, or when,
It's true.
it's like you can't always even know. I remember one time my daughter
Yeah.
was so upset with me because, I mean, I'm aging myself here, but the radio was playing. And, it was a time where you couldn't control like what song came on next, and her favorite
Right.
song
Yeah.
ended. And then the new song began and she kept saying, put it back. Cause at home we could do that. And I said, I can't. It's just, we're in the car and the car
Mhm.
doesn't do that. And she cried for 30 minutes until we got home. And I just had to let her, she cried and I said, I'm so sorry. I know. I wish I could have that song play right now. Desperately, I wish I could have that
Mhm,
song play again, but I
mhm,
can't, and you're going to be okay. And so ultimately, just recognizing that this is a little bit of a new terrain for us and we've just got to do
mhm,
the best we can and lean on people and get the support. That's why spaces like what you've created with the Reflective
mhm,
Parenting Club is so important,
mhm,
because I think when we see our story in others, we just feel a
mhm.
little less isolated in that process and we're like, "Oh, okay. It's going to be okay."
It is
This
important. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
so I think it's really really important to think about those types of resources.
Sometimes even before the tantrum happens, we're just trying to get our child to cooperate, to follow, right? We just want things, we have this fantasy in our mind that things will go smoothly and it doesn't always.
Mhm.
What would you, do you have any advice, I guess, for a parent who, I mean, in the end, sometimes it's not just about stopping the tantrum. It hasn't started yet, but I ask my child, like you said, right, to clean up
Yeah.
or we have to leave. You know, a lot of parents will tell me that morning routines are very difficult because there's a time limit to it. It's we need to get out now. By the time it's, 7:40 a.m., we need to be out of the door. We see the time limit. They don't. Life
Mhm.
is beautiful.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
might be playing, you might be eating breakfast. Why are you rushing me? Like the life is great, but it creates a lot of stress and overwhelm for parents. So, do you have any advice for parents who are listening to this saying tantrums usually start because I'm putting pressure on my child and then the time limit is there and I don't get cooperation from them. I just need them to cooperate and follow. What can you offer them as advice?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we can think about. And I hear the exact same thing. And morning routines are a big one, right? Like that's a big source of stress or a big point of stress for a lot of families. So I think the first place I would tell a family if you're having kind of constant battles in the morning is one, make sure you're giving yourself enough time. And I remember saying this. We used to travel a lot when the kids were little, and my husband and I used to joke and say, okay, should we get up? And if we think we should get up an hour before, we should probably get up 2 hours before. Like,
Mm,
before we had to be at the airport or whatever, because it always felt like there was just more that we ended up needing to do. So I would say making sure you're giving yourself enough time, because I would rather have extra time and not feel that sense of
mm,
pressure in order to get through the morning a little bit easier. I would rather have the kids go to sleep a little earlier the evening before and have them wake up a little earlier so that you're not sort of fighting with them from the minute the
mm,
alarm goes off, from struggling to get out of bed, things like that. So just checking to see like the sleep hygiene. Are they getting enough sleep? Are they waking up
mm,
rested and ready to go? Or are they kind
mm,
of feeling like they're not getting enough sleep and they're a little groggy and they're wishing they could stay in bed? And, so first I would just start there of giving yourself enough time so you don't have that time pressure.
mm,
The next thing I do, and I've done this with families, is I'll tell them on the weekends. I know this is kind of the most unideal thing to do on a weekend, but pretend you have to be somewhere in the morning and just run through that task. But now the difference is you, the parent, know in your mind there really is no time pressure. So I want
mm,
you to run through that whole sequence that you do in the morning, but I don't want you to constantly remind them. And you don't have to, because technically, even if they're a half hour late, it doesn't really matter because you're not really having to be to this place
exactly.
at a
Mm,
time. And it is almost every single time the kids get ready exactly like they're supposed to, and there is no battle. It's not to say that we're the reason, but it is to say that when we feel that induced stress of being
mhm,
on time and not being late, and all of that comes with it, it naturally impacts the way we connect with our kids, or the way
mhm,
we talk to our kids, or the way we are so adamant that they just get ready faster and go faster. And so for a child who is learning and trying to understand, hey, like like you said, I'm liking my slow morning. I like having breakfast and like just looking out the window and, listening to the birds chirp. And you're like, well, I have
yeah.
a meeting in
Yeah.
20 minutes. And, so you have all this other
Yeah.
anxiety around it
Mm,
that they don't quite have. And understandably so. So it's really taking those things and trying to bridge that so you can bring them a little closer to your side, which is to get out the door on time, but that you can also go toward what they're experiencing, which is that there is no need to rush in their world. So that's what I always kind of say. Let's
I
start
like that.
there, of just like
Mm,
do a couple of test runs where you don't have that time pressure on you, and just stop and notice what's the difference in your body, how you're feeling,
mhm,
how are your kids responding? Are they responding differently now? Because you're
mm.
not like, let's go. I already said it 3 times. Like we tend to
The
get really,
language.
yeah, right. Like we're
Mm,
anxious,
yeah.
without even meaning it or realizing it. And then you can do a lot of different things like schedules. You can give kids checklists to work on in the morning. You can
Mm,
do, even for young kids, there's really great like little Velcro ones that are just
Mhm.
pictures. So it's just like brushing your teeth, eating your breakfast, getting your backpack. And kids love that sense of autonomy because now all of a sudden it's their tasks, it's their
Mm.
things to do. For a child who might be a little more self determined, I always say make them part of the process. They love being
Mm.
relied on, so that's
Mhm.
something like, hey, listen, me and you, we got to figure out how to get the other two ready on time with us, right? Like, can I depend on you? Can you get brother's jeans and sweatshirt out for him? And can you, help him if he needs help with his socks? And can you go get the backpacks ready in the mudroom for us before? And all of a sudden, you will see a child who is usually confrontational to like, I'm in. Yes, I will
Yeah.
do that. And so,
I got this. Yes.
yes, exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
think
get
there
that.
is that mattering
Mm.
piece of knowing that we rely on them. So
Mm.
there are so many, I could go on and on, but I
But
always
yeah.
say it starts with us calming down. It starts with
Mhm.
us then getting flexible and creative and looking to see what do our kids need individually and like what do we need collectively so we can get
Mm.
out the door on time.
And I absolutely love the idea of practice, and I think this can apply to almost any example, right? Because just the morning routine as an example, I think that when we have more time, maybe our language changes, right? So for an example of a parent that I had worked with, she said that she would yell at the kids and be like, we're going to be late, we're going to be late, let's go, we're going to be late. And I said, well, how, that's already like dysregulating the nervous
Yes.
system. Like, I'm going to be
Mhm.
late, you're stating it as a fact. And so if you're telling me this, I'm nervous now. I'm not thinking anymore because we're going to be late. And so I'm very dysregulated, and she hadn't realized that, right? And I said, what about if we say, let's try to be on time, right? Like, now you're
Mhm.
not, it's very different, we're doing the same thing, but it's said very differently. And so just that made a big difference in how the morning routine was happening. So that's number one. But number two, when we do the practice run, like you said, I think it allows us to also see that we might be a little bit more playful, right? Because we know
Mhm.
that there's no time pressure. And so, if being playful, Tina Payne Bryson has been on this podcast, and she was talking about her new book, and she said, it could be like, okay, put on your socks and let's start a story. Once upon a time, there was a bear, and the bear was in the forest. And all of a sudden, okay, put on your pants, and then after we'll continue the story, right?
Mhm.
We forget that kids, again, I think it comes back to this, or these unrealistic expectations. We expect them to function in a world similarly to us, but they're
Yeah.
not. Like, they again are being playful, like you said. It's like having breakfast. Oh, a bird, and or a squirrel, and I'm gonna look at that squirrel and not hurry up and like shove my food down my throat, right? Like, it's, I want to take
Yeah.
my time. So I
Mhm.
think it's such an important reminder to say, like, let's practice this. Let's do this together and see how it works. See what works, sorry, and see what doesn't work, and keep building on that. So it's such great advice.
Thank you. Yeah. And I love the story. I love what you just shared too. Just like telling that story and stopping at a cliffhanger. I mean, again, like just when we're calm and regulated, we can access those parts of ourselves. But when we're stressed and tense, we're so closed off. It's like all we're seeing, it's so linear. It's like, I need to get up to work on time and my kid is the barrier right now. And I've got to figure out how to and instead, like if we just shifted that to be like, how can I think the way they think? How can I play the way they play?
Exactly.
How can I
Mm.
engage them in a way that would feel like less stress, but would also get my goal accomplished as well, which is to get them out the door.
You touched on something before that I need to bring back. I'm really curious about something. So, when parents have different styles, right? Different, and especially when it comes around tantrums or emotions, maybe one parent sees that as this as bad behavior and that needs to be disciplined, versus the other parent who says, "Well, I'm trying to follow different types of parenting styles or something that's not similar to yours, and I believe that I need to nurture that emotion." And maybe the other parent sees that as like being permissive and allowing the emotion to happen or the behavior. Does your four-step process is that a way? I only realized as you were talking and saying this, would that be a way to come together into one? Like, it's not even, sometimes I tell parents, like, it's not even about parenting styles. It's truly about supporting that child's emotions and their behavior and development. So would your four-step process work for parents that feel like they're in disagreement in their styles?
Yeah, I think, PAR is really helpful in a lot of instances. It's interesting. I've had couples who I work with who are like, I actually stopped using it with my kids because that's great now. I can be calm, but now I do it when my partner and I disagree, or I use it at work with a coworker because I was feeling really reactive. And really, ultimately, PAR is the essence of it is it's trying to really help you unearth the story underneath the trigger. So what's the thing that's triggering you? Why are you so activated by that? And that's okay, right? We all have them. And then let's create awareness around it so that once that awareness is there, it suddenly doesn't have the same hold on you. It doesn't get you to that state. You almost observe it and are like, okay, I know what I'm feeling right now. And I have a choice in this. I can take space right now because I don't have to yell at this moment. I can actually just take a big deep breath and realize this doesn't need an immediate response, or I can think about what I want to say first. And so it's not that you're abandoning or bypassing what you're experiencing. It's that you're just more conscious of it, and you're also not succumbing to that sense of emotional insecurity is what's sort of at the crux of it. So in regards to couples, there's a few things that I always remind them of, or when we're working together, it's really healthy to have different opinions on sort of how to meet your child's needs, and if parenting styles are
Hmm.
different. I can say that now as a parent of two now young adult kids, they really come to my husband and I for a lot of advice, but often for different reasons. Like they might seek me out in one way, but they realize my husband is maybe more of that pragmatic, like cuts, black and white kind of advice, or he might walk them through a situation and go like, did you notice this or this? And he can do those things. His background speaks to that. He has more of that sort of analytical mind, and I'm definitely more of that free spirit, like emotional, and that type of a person. So it balances out, and I think kids benefit from that because they learn how to adapt to different parenting styles, and
Sure.
and
Yeah.
it helps them become more flexible. But I tell parents all the time, number one is don't try to work on it during the moment of dysregulation, meaning like when
Right.
your child's having that tantrum, that's usually when we take the bait. So maybe one of them says, one partner might say, you're being so soft on them, I can't believe you're hugging them, this is why they're like this. And so now the minute we engage in that battle during that moment,
Yeah.
nothing is going to get accomplished, nothing meaningful.
Mm,
At least you'll just
mm,
upset each other further. So one is recognize the timing, allow the storm to pass, allow yourselves to calm down, really sit with what came up for you. Like for dads, a lot of times when I work with them, it's the sense of like feeling disrespected, right? That disrespect, and that sort of that idea of like what it means to be a father, and like maybe the way they were fathered sort of keeps coming up for them. And for a lot of mothers, there is a sense of like, well, if you're going to come and be really strict and harsh, then I have to be the softer parent of the two. And so we tend to compensate for where we think the other is falling short. So make the aim when you're talking about it to connect and not correct. I think more often than not, we start some of those statements with like, well, if you weren't yelling at him the whole time, I wouldn't have had to go over there and give him, but you were scaring him. And so we defend. And then the other partner might say, well, I have to come down that harsh because no, you're never setting a boundary and following through. And so now it becomes this back and forth. And instead, what if you just turned and said, you know what? I love how you show up for him. And I love that he is so playful with you. And I love the way you joke with him, and that you guys wrestle, and that you do all these great things. Here's for me what I'm seeing when his emotions get really activated. It does activate me too. And I want to escalate and I want to yell, but I want to try doing things a different way. I want to try it a little differently than what we had to go through, what we experienced as kids, which was likely punishments for expressing big emotions. Like, what if we stuck to this for a couple of weeks, and just tried it this way, and just thought about doing it this way? And like, where can we show up in these, in this capacity for each other? Maybe it's that every time you're bothered by something I'm doing, maybe we just commit the next time that we're just not going to say anything to each other in that moment. Maybe we start there. And those have been really effective techniques that I have with a lot. And a lot of times they'll bring those conversations to me in our next call. And they'll say, okay, here's what happened. So and so had a big tantrum. Here's, where we both kind of went wrong. Here's what we said, you know, help us unpack this. And we
right.
do. And I always say I'm not by any means a marriage counselor, but what I can offer you is I'm an objective third party who understands childhood development. And I can weigh in terms of what your child needs in that moment versus what's coming up for both of you, which is a very different thing.
And I love that. And I know I understand that feeling of like, I'm not a therapist, but I think when we look
Yes.
at it from the child's perspective, we can support them in how they're understanding their child. And from my perspective, it's more in terms of emotion regulation skills. Like if we view
Yeah.
that situation in terms of how did you regulate or not regulate and that other person that's involved, then we can understand each other a little bit more. So it's really,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot, and this is kind of like maybe another discussion, but really seeing that there's space for other people to come in and support parents, because I think that this is my own personal mission. I just feel that parents don't get enough support. Like I believe that when you bring your child to see their pediatrician, most of what you're saying is, I'm struggling. Most of what you're saying is they're having these big emotions. They're non-medical, situations that the child is experiencing. And there's not enough out there in terms of support. There are resources like yourself and myself. There are others as well, but still not enough. It's just not enough, and not there directly to support the parent. It should be easy to access, and the pediatrician should say, like, hey, here's the resources. Here are the resources you need, to help them feel less alone.
You made me think of something too when you were saying that. A lot of
Mm,
times on my very first call, if it's both, the a couple, if both parties are there on that call, what I'll often have them do is I'll say to them, describe yourselves as parents, as a team, and describe the other, right? And it's
hmm,
really interesting because I think it, like, sometimes they'll even end in tears because they're like, I never knew you
hmm.
thought I was that kind of a mom,
Right.
or I never knew you
Yeah.
thought that about my fathering skills or my parenting skills. But I think sometimes we
Mm,
we tend to engage more in combat, like when things are not
yeah.
working, when we're upset with each other. But in the good moments, we're not really saying that either. So the reason I do that is really because if we can start there where we both know that we both agree we want what's best for this child, we both want to raise an emotionally resilient child. We both want to raise a child that feels safe in this environment to express their emotions and to know they can come to us. Okay, well, those things are great. And now talk to me a little bit about how your partner parents. And they'll say the sweetest things, like, she can show up in those situations where it's so hard for me and she's just there and she knows how to really give my kids what they need. Or like, a
Mm,
mother will say about a father, like, he's just so steady and he's such an anchor for the kids. And they just, I love the way you joke with them, or I love the way you said this to them the other day. You were so kind and vulnerable. And it's amazing that you kind of think about it, like, even within your own partnership, like, how often
mm.
do we take moments to just cheer each other on?
We
And
don't. Not
yeah,
enough.
right. It's just
Mm,
not enough. So I think, you don't have to work with me to do that. It's just a good practice to just
yeah.
remind yourself that sometimes it's important to take those moments and just go, you know what, that tantrum was a level 10, and maybe we didn't do the right thing, but man, we got through it. And we are champs and we have the greatest kids in the world and we're going to figure this out. And sometimes that's the best place to start. Have humor about it. My husband and I used to laugh all the time, like, I cannot believe this is our life, but we we are going to be okay. Like,
Yeah.
other people do it. We can manage.
Yeah.
So I think,
Mm.
just bring some lightness to it. It does pass.
And it's been a few years now. My husband and I, we started high fiving each other every once in a while. It's like we made
Oh,
it at the end of the day. It's like high five.
yes.
Good job.
Yep, you made
um,
it.
yeah, and I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation in terms of truly understanding tantrums, and getting a bit of support in terms of how to support their kids. Is there anything else you think a parent should know? And then I'd like to kind of make our way into how do parents reach you and find you, and I'll put all of that in the show notes.
Yeah, just recognize and know that, parenting is a series of transient phases. They are short lived. What you're in right now will not be your reality a year from now. It's going to
True.
change, it'll be
Mhm.
different. So, as much as you can remember that, right? Sometimes we can look at things with such permanence and be like, oh my gosh, but that's not really the case. And if you can just allow yourself to sort of heal, grow, and parent alongside your child and parent yourself in that process, and just really enjoy the ride, because it really does, as a mother of a now 21 and 19-year-old, it is so hard when you don't have those days anymore of them just being little. And honestly, it's every stage is fun and enjoyable for different reasons, and every stage has challenges. So that's just going to be there. And I think, a piece of advice that I had written in an article that resonates with me a lot, that I share with a lot of families, is imagine the moment you're in right now and just fast forward 10 years from now. And I call it the rear view mirror test. And when you look back 10, like, at that part of yourself, that 10-year version of yourself looks back, and then they see this moment, are they going to really remember the dishes that didn't get done, or the playroom that maybe didn't look perfectly clean at the end of the day? Is that version of you going to hold on to the fact that your child had a tantrum because the Lego tower wasn't the right green on the top, and they had a tantrum and you lost it?
Mm,
And, no, but they're
yeah.
going to remember that you stopped what you were doing and you went outside and played with them barefoot in the grass, or that
Yeah.
you did picnics with them in the living
Mm,
room, and that you guys, broke the rules that day and had so much fun doing those things. And my husband would go away for work. I would tell, like, the first night my kids and I would always do ice cream sundaes for dinner. Like, those
I
are the
love that.
moments I think that kids will hold on to, and you will too. You will too. So
Mm.
just to know that it's a small moment in time, and you just got to put one foot in front of the other.
Thank you for sharing that. How can we reach you? And I know there must be some parents that really need help with this. How can they find you?
I appreciate that. I'm at the Parenting Reframe. I'm on TikTok and on Instagram. I also have a Substack. My Substack's a little broader. It's called the Parenting and Life Reframe. It's kind of where I get to have my creative fun, and I
Mm.
share life insights, parenting insights. A lot of times those two worlds collide. So I share insights from both places and a little bit more about my personal journey. So I'm on there as well. And yeah, you can just visit me at any one of those spots. And if you want to DM me on Instagram or send me an email at Albiona at theparentingreframe.com, I'd be happy to connect.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait for the next time that we get to talk again.
Oh, thanks, Cindy. I agree. I feel the same way. I love it.
Thank you.